Hello and welcome to the show.
Hello and welcome to this week's episode of All Geeks Aside. This is a special episode, as this episode was requested by a listener, and I've decided to do it a little bit differently, as it is not a character as such. It is a spaceship. Although it has had many incarnations throughout its decades of service, it is a very recognizable silhouette of a ship, and its engines produce a special sound when they thrust them into warp. Even though there is no sound in space, we can thank George Lucas and Gene Roddenberry for this. So this week, I am doing NCC 1701, the USS Enterprise. The Enterprise has been the name of many vessels throughout history, be it an aircraft carrier during World War II or the first nuclear-class carrier. It has also been a space shuttle for NASA, and it is slated to the name of the third of a new class of carrier, Gerald R. Ford class, which is scheduled to be in operation in 2027. Now, in Starfleet, or actually before Starfleet, the Enterprise NX-01 was the first Warp 5 starship to be launched. The prototype of the NX class, it was launched in 2151 and was decommissioned in 2161. Its relative short service life can be attributed to the formation of the Federation. Its technology was far behind that of some of the founding races, rendering it immediately obsolete. Although in its short history it participated in many first contact missions. It also helped deal with the Xindi and several other missions during its illustrious career under Captain Jonathan Archer. So, you could be silly to think, like I am, that we still have time to construct the Enterprise from Star Trek Discovery. Be it not the one from today, maybe Gene Roddenberry was actually a time traveler, and these stories of Captain Kirk were in fact his past. So let us get into the starship itself and how it was created and where it was created and its first captains. It was in the early to mid 23rd century that at least 12 heavy cruiser type starships dubbed Constitution class were commissioned by the Federation Starfleet. The vessel registered NCC 1701, which was constructed in San Francisco and assembled in space, was christened the Enterprise. But what is Starfleet? Well, it is basically the NASA of the 21st century, but they do exploration as well as defense of the United Federation of Planets. The first captain of the Enterprise was Captain Christopher Pike, and he commanded the Enterprise from the early 2250s into the 2260s. His missions included voyages to the Rigel, Vega, and Talos systems, but it is Pike's half-Vulcan science officer, Spock, who served under him for over 11 years and ultimately became the starship's longest-serving officer. It is he who we will find the most interesting and the most fluid through all of this history. He never changes as being his science officer. And now we have some more crossover between some of the other iterations of Starfleet that we have seen throughout history. In 2256, Michael Burnham encourages Cadet Tilly, who was serving on the USS Discovery, to improve her physical condition so that she would stand out amongst her peers and be assigned to the Enterprise or one of her sister ships. In 2257, Captain Pike on the Enterprise sent out a Priority 1 distress call that was received by the USS Discovery while en route to Vulcan, and the Enterprise would rendezvous with the Discovery after they dropped out of warp. Now, the most famous thing that the Enterprise is known for would be its 5-year mission of discovery. But here's where things have gotten all timey-wimey in the last few years. Do we go with the original history of the Enterprise or the alternate timeline from the temporal incursions created by Nero? So how did Captain Kirk become the captain of the Enterprise? So I decided that I would look at both histories and let's see how things changed. So in the pre-Nero incursion, Kirk admired his father, stating that it was his accomplishments that caused him to join Starfleet. During his time at Starfleet, he became the first and only cadet to defeat the Kobayashi Maru scenario, a simulation that is to evaluate the student's reaction to the no-win, battle, and rescue situation. Kirk refused to accept his first 2 defeats, and he tried a 3rd time, but this time Kirk had an ace up his sleeve. He had secretly reprogrammed the simulation's computer, consequently becoming the only cadet in Academy history to beat the no-win scenario, earning a commendation for his original thinking. And sometime in the year 2265, or perhaps the year prior to this, Kirk was awarded his command, and it was, of course, the USS Enterprise. And now we have the meddling of the Romulan Nero. Now, James's parents were aboard the USS Kelvin, as they were both members of Starfleet, and it came under attack from Nero's mining vessel, the Naradu. The captain of the Kelvin went to Naradu to negotiate terms, and George Kirk was left in command. It soon became apparent that Nero's vessel had opened fire and was willing to destroy the ship. All personnel were evacuated, and all that remained was George Kirk, who, in a last-ditch effort, pilots the Kelvin into the Naradu in a kamikaze attack. With his wife safely on a medical vessel, James was born, and his father died a gallant death and saved the lives of 800 people. The date was January 4th, 2233. And here's where things start to get a little bit funny, as the original Prime Universe James Kirk was born March 22nd. This means that the attack may have caused him to be born 2.5 months premature. We shall never know. Now, the young Kirk in the alternate timeline is also named James Tiberius Kirk. The reason for his name is it is his mother's father's name and his father's father's name. And James was raised in Iowa, in North America, on the planet Earth. His mother did remarry, and as a young boy, Jim had somewhat of a rebellious streak in him, as he once, for example, did steal his stepfather's 1965 Chevy Corvette convertible. And as he grew up, he had little sense of purpose, and in 2255, he was an aimless rebel who had found himself on the wrong side of the law on more than one occasion. But it is while visiting a bar near the Riverside shipyard in 2255, a very drunk Jim met and began flirting with a Starfleet cadet named Nyota Uhura. Although she did seem a little bit annoyed by Jim's advances, she was surprised that Jim knew what was involved in the study of xenolinguistics. Moments later, the 22-year-old Jim Kirk was unfortunately engulfed in red shirts, and he began to fight them off. Now, anyone who knows Star Trek knows that red shirts are usually security officers and most of the time are expendable. These red shirts were irritated at the cocky attitude of James Kirk and also the attention that he was giving Cadet Uhura. Jim is unfortunately overwhelmed by the cadets, and Captain Pike had to step in and break up the fight. Now, Captain Pike had written his dissertation on the USS Kelvin and was very familiar with Jim's story. He pushed the young man to challenge himself to reach the greater potential that he was capable of achieving, calling him the only genius-level repeat offender in the Midwest. Captain Pike proceeded to persuade Jim to join Starfleet, firmly believing that he could do more with himself than get into bar fights and break all of the laws in the state of Iowa. Jim laughed at the idea of joining Starfleet, but Pike reassured him that with his off-the-chart aptitude, he could make captain and have his own ship in as little as 8 years. He reminded him that it was his father had saved 800 lives, including Jim's life and his mother's, and he dared the young Jim to do better. Soon after this conversation, and to the surprise of Captain Pike, Jim decided to enlist with the intent of completing the academy training in 3 years. He rode into the shipyard, handed the keys to his bike to a construction worker, and boarded a shuttle for new recruits headed to Starfleet Academy. It is here on the shuttle trip to the Academy that he is met with and befriends Dr. Leonard McCoy. Kirk and McCoy became very close friends at the Academy, though Kirk frequently exasperated McCoy with his maverick nature. Kirk did have an eye for the attractive female cadets, and he once ended up in the dorm of an Orion female cadet named Galia. He was caught and he hid under the bed. When her roommate, Cadet Uhura, came in, she found him and kicked him out. It was at the Academy that Kirk also met Commander Spock. Now, like the previous Kirk, as all cadets have to, Kirk failed the Kobayashi Maru exam, and he decided to take it a third time, being sure that he would succeed. He eventually managed to cheat the test and won. Spock, who programmed the no-win scenario, later investigated the matter and discovered that he had cheated. Spock goes to the Starfleet Academy principal, the board admiral, and Kirk is with him, and he accuses him of cheating. Kirk argued that the test itself was a cheat and stated that he didn't believe in the no-win scenario. And Kirk asks to face his accuser, and Spock stood up. This was the first time the two met, and they clashed over their differences. Even though his upbringing was different, the result was the same. This time, however, Kirk was not given a commendation for thinking outside of the box. He was put on reprimand. Kirk and Spock continued to argue, and the accused became particularly agitated when Spock suggests that, of all people, George Kirk's son should recognize the no-win scenario. Unfortunately, the hearing is suddenly interrupted after Starfleet received a distress call from Vulcan. Many of the cadets were called into action, but since Kirk had just been suspended because of his academic dishonesty charge, he was not allowed to join. In stepped Leonard McCoy, who was, in fact, a medical officer aboard the Enterprise, and was able to get him on board the Enterprise by injecting him with a vaccine that would temporarily render him sick, so he could be transferred to the ship on medical grounds. Kirk had figured out that this whole thing was a trap being perpetrated by Nero. Kirk tried to tell Captain Pike and Spock about Nero's attack and his trap, and with the help of McCoy and Uhura, was able to convince Pike of the trap. As the Enterprise exited warp, Pike immediately raised the shields and they entered the Vulcan system, only to find a massive debris field of destroyed Federation starships that had been attacked by Nero. As with the USS Kelvin, Pike was now en route via a shuttlecraft to negotiate with Nero, and he appointed Kirk as his acting first officer under acting Captain Spock, and he volunteered Kirk to disable the drill that was being used by Nero's ship. To do so, Kirk, along with two others, Chief Engineer Olson and Lieutenant Hikaru Sulu, dove from a shuttle to the platform containing the drill. Unfortunately, Olson was vaporized because he was trying to be a crazy person at this point, and Kirk and Sulu had to disable it. In the process of trying to disable it, they were faced against two of Nero's crew. Kirk and Sulu eventually killed both of their adversaries before destroying the platform, but not in time to prevent Nero from successfully completing his plan and destroying the planet Vulcan. Before returning to Enterprise, Sulu fell off the drill platform and began plummeting towards the surface of Vulcan. Kirk jumped off the platform to save him. After intercepting Sulu, Kirk and the helmsman pulled his parachute and was knocked off, leaving them both to freefall. However, the Enterprise was fitted with transport devices, and Ensign Chekhov managed to compensate for Vulcan's gravitational pull and beam them both on board, something that would not have been possible in the original Enterprise. Kirk attempted to dissuade Captain Spock from a rendezvous with the rest of Starfleet. He urged him to go after the Naradu as the ship left for Earth, rather than waste time trying to gather additional forces in the opposite direction. But Spock was relentless. When Kirk became more and more heated in his objections, Spock finally ordered Kirk's removal from the ship's bridge and knocked him out and threw him off the ship in an escape pod. Kirk had landed on a nearby planet known as Delta Vega, some 14 kilometers away from a nearby Starfleet outpost. Despite an inhospitable environment, he left his escape pod and soon was chased by an indigenous animal, which was dispatched by an even larger predatory creature. When Kirk fled into the nearby cave, the creature was scared away by an elderly Vulcan man. He revealed himself to be Spock from a future timeline. Though Kirk initially dismissed this as bullshit, he changed his mind when the old man demonstrated his knowledge of Nero. The elderly Spock revealed to Kirk through a mind meld Nero's intentions, also telling him that in this timeline, Kirk was the captain of the USS Enterprise, understanding that their only hope was to have the Enterprise pursue the Naradu instead of returning to the fleet. They realized that they had to get the other Spock to step down from command. Fortunately, while Enterprise had long since left the system, Spock was aware that one of the officers at the nearby outpost was a one Montgomery Scott, who, in Spock's universe, had devised a way to beam onto a ship at warp speed. Spock gave the equation to Montgomery Scott, and Kirk and Scott beamed aboard the Enterprise. Following the advice of Ambassador Spock, not Commander Spock at this point, Kirk goaded Commander Spock. Assertions that Spock cared nothing for what happened to Vulcan or the death of his mother, whom he accused Spock of never having loved. The last remark did the job, and Spock violently attacked Kirk, nearly to the point of killing him, before Sarek stepped in and stopped him. Sarek was Spock's father. Following Spock immediately relinquishing command, Kirk, as acting first officer, took command and ordered pursuit course of the Naradu to Earth. In the end, Kirk defeated Nero and was given command of the USS Enterprise. So there you can see the differences in how James Tiberius Kirk from the original and James Tiberius Kirk from the Nero timeline gained command of the Enterprise. In 2259, the Enterprise was sent to survey the planet Nibiru. I'm going to stick with the Nero James Kirk for a little bit longer. It's a very interesting story, and he doesn't always keep command of the Enterprise. We also meet some familiar faces. So, back to the planet Nibiru, the crew discovered a volcanic eruption that would render a primitive race completely extinct. Kirk parked the Enterprise underwater despite protests from Montgomery Scott, who had taken over as chief engineer, because the ship could not be seen. I should have prefaced with this. Under Starfleet rules, any life form or any race who have not yet achieved warp were not allowed to be shown any technologies that would accelerate their evolution. So the people on Nibiru were very, very primitive, to the point that they worshipped a piece of paper. So Bones and Kirk infiltrate the tribe, steal the piece of paper, and have them chase them to get them away from the volcano. Inside the volcano is Commander Spock, who is using a cold fusion device to render the volcano inert. However, the space shuttle that is hovering above the volcano's mouth had to ditch and go back to the Enterprise, leaving Spock alone with the cold fusion device and no way out. Spock, stating the prime directive to Kirk, tells him to leave him to die. Of course, Kirk does not listen takes the ship up, rescues Spock. Ultimately, the primitive people of Nibiru see the ship and begin to worship it as a god. Upon returning to Earth, Kirk and Spock are requested before Pike. And Spock had included all of this in his report, but Kirk had left out all of it. As the Prime Directive was broken, Pike was given command of the Enterprise back, and Kirk was demoted. That evening, with all of the captains and first officers in a meeting, a one rogue agent named John Harrison attacked Starfleet headquarters to assassinate Marcus, but he killed Pike instead. Marcus gave a vengeful Kirk permission to take the Enterprise to the planet Kronos, where Harrison had fled, and fire on his location with 72 advanced long-range torpedoes. Chief Engineer Scott protested that loading of photon torpedoes aboard Enterprise without his chance of examining them, and offered his resignation, which Kirk accepted, and Chekhov was appointed as Scott's replacement. Now, Kronos is a planet that is very large within the Starfleet and Star Trek mythology. Kronos is the homeworld of the Klingon Empire. The Klingons don't really play a big part in this one, so we will leave it out for now. Kirk found Harrison on Kronos and had him brought to the brig after a little run-in with some Klingons, and Harrison ended up saving them using very big guns. Harrison was reticent about his motives, but suggested Kirk examine the torpedoes Marcus gave him, and also gave him a set of coordinates, which the captain sent to Montgomery Scott to investigate. Now, aboard the ship was Marcus's daughter Carol, who was a science officer, and McCoy, who was a doctor. The torpedoes were very, very advanced and needed skilled hands to open them. In stepped McCoy. They tried to open the torpedo, setting off a detonation sequence. But upon opening it, after stopping the detonation, they find a man in cryogenic stasis. It is then that Harrison revealed who he really was. His name was Khan Noonien Singh, and the torpedoes are all his friends. Now, Khan Noonien Singh was an augmented human, and the rest of the 72 people in cryostasis were also augments. Now, Marcus had threatened Harrison or Khan into cooperation by saying he would destroy his family, as Khan called them. Marcus then arrived in the USS Vengeance and demanded Kirk hand over Khan, but when Kirk refused, intending to expose the conspiracy by bringing Khan to trial on Earth. The Vengeance was the only Starfleet ship designed not for exploration, but only for war. The Vengeance caught up with the Enterprise at warp and fired on it, halting it as it arrived just outside Earth. Marcus beamed his daughter up before preparing to wipe out all of the witnesses to his plot, but Scott, who had snuck aboard the Vengeance at the coordinates given to him by Kirk, deactivated its weapons, and Kirk and Khan put on a set of spacesuits and headed for the Vengeance, while Spock ordered McCoy to remove the cryotubes from the torpedoes. At this point, the Enterprise has been crippled and is now spiraling towards Earth, and aboard the Vengeance, Khan and Admiral Marcus demand Spock hand over the torpedoes in exchange for Kirk, Scott, and Carol, and the safety of the Enterprise crew. Spock, knowing that Khan would not hold up his end of the bargain, set the transported torpedoes to detonate in the Vengeance cargo bay. The damage inflicted caused both ships to hurtle to Earth, but Kirk was able to repair the warp core before Enterprise crashed. So that is all of the alternate timelines that is equally as informative as the pre-Nero timelines. Now back to the pre-Nero timeline for a bit, but in the same year. In 2265, the Enterprise was assigned to its aforementioned 5-year mission of deep space exploration, and command had passed to James Tiberius Kirk once again. The ship's primary goal during this mission was to seek out alien life and alien civilizations, and to boldly go where no man had gone before. Captain Kirk's standing order was included to investigate all quasars and quasar-like phenomena. I've always wondered why this was. Beyond its primary mission, the Enterprise defended the Federation territories against aggression, and aid member worlds in crisis, and provide scientific expeditions and colonies in her patrol area, with annual examinations and support, since the Enterprise was in fact fitted with some 14 science labs. Now, what discoveries did the Enterprise make? Now, from 2265 to 2270, the Enterprise visited over 70 different worlds and encountered representatives of over 60 different species. More than 20 of those were first contacts with beings previously unknown to the Federation, including stellar neighbors like the First Federation, the Gorn, voyagers from the Kelvin Empire in distant Andromeda, and powerful non-corporeal entities like the Thanos and Trelane and the Organians. 2 discovered species were the first known example of silicone-based life forms, the Horta and the Excalbians. The Enterprise was the first Federation vessel to survive an encounter with the galactic barrier. During this mission, the ship's warp drive and other systems were critically damaged, and casualties totaled 12 crew members and officers. The Enterprise was traveling through space in a region hundreds of light years further than any other Earth ship had explored. Now, I can imagine that all the Trekkies here are wondering, non-Trekkies are wondering what stardates are, as the stardate today in this story is 4657.5. And I remember wondering how these worked, and in short, they are a mathematical representation of the date, and they take into account the location in the galaxy, velocity of travel, and some other factors. But it would appear that most of the time they're just numbers. They have been fixed in recent years, but in this case and in these histories, the stories, the dates don't mean anything. So any dates that I tell you, we won't really worry about it. Now, something that does cause things to worry is time travel. As with Nero, time travel is something that the Enterprise and James Tiberius Kirk have experienced many times. But 2 of them in particular. The following 2 accidental temporal displacements or time travel jumps, the Enterprise became the first Federation ship to deliberately control a time travel jump. Observing the death throes of Psi 2000, the crew suffered from polywater intoxication, and the Enterprise nearly lost orbit after the engine shut down. A previously untested cold start via controlled matter-antimatter implosion saved the ship, but the high-speed escape from the planet's gravity well caused the ship to travel 3 days into the past. Also, the USS Enterprise, in a future Enterprise iteration, I think it was the B, went back in time to save the whales. That's a story for a different day. Now, Kirk and the Enterprise, as I said, have met with many other species, and some of them were peaceful, others were not. When Kirk met with the Romulans, he was the first to repel the Romulan incursion into the Federation space in over a century, on stardate 1709.2, or in and around 2266. A Romulan bird of prey, which was their version of a battleship, was equipped with a cloak and powerful plasma torpedoes, destroyed 4 Earth outpost stations along the Romulan neutral zone. Enterprise engaged and pursued the Romulan ship, disabling it before the Romulan commander ordered his own ship to self-destruct. Kirk and his bridge crew became the first Starfleet officers to make visual contact with a Romulan, finally revealing themselves to Starfleet. Now, the Enterprise reached XO3, which was a space station, on stardate 2712.4, where Dr. Roger Corby was found after years of silence exploring and exploiting a sophisticated android manufacturing technology, the legacy of a long-dead civilization. Corby had in fact replaced his own damaged body, transplanting his personality into an android replica, and built himself a beautiful companion named Andrea. Against Kirk's wishes, an android duplicate of Kirk was created too. However, the android Corby, after exhibiting madness, he did unfortunately kill himself. But is it really suicide if it was a machine with a human brain? Or was it just shut down permanently? I don't know. In 2267, while escaping the gravitational pull of a black star, the Enterprise was hurled through space and time to Earth in 1969. The crew developed and executed a method to return to their own time by warping around the sun's gravity well in a slingshot maneuver. A year later, the Enterprise was ordered to repeat the recently proven slingshot effect to return to the Earth's past on a mission of historical observation. Now, some missions of discovery confronted Enterprise with entities and mechanisms that threatened the great swaths of the Federation and neighboring space. In 2267, a planet killer, fueled by the consumption of planets itself, was destroying planets in a path that led directly to Federation population centers. It took the combined efforts of the Enterprise and her sister ship, the USS Constellation, to destroy it. And then 1 year later, in 2268, a single-celled organism of colossal scale began emitting negative energy that was toxic to humanoid life, killing an entire Vulcan crew aboard the USS Intrepid. The Enterprise penetrated the cell interior and destroyed the organism before its imminent cell division threatened to overwhelm the rest of the galaxy. Now, the very nature of its mission of exploration meant that the Enterprise was frequently the only Federation military asset in a little-known, otherwise undefended frontier. When called into harm's way, the ship regularly did so with little chance of immediate support against previously unknown enemies and threats. Happily, the Enterprise's earliest engagements of the 5-year mission against a deceptively powerful starship called the Thesaurus ended with an amicable first contact with the First Federation in 2266. Following the destruction of a colony on Cestus III, a surprise attack from a previously unknown species led the Enterprise to battle and pursue an evenly matched Gorn starship in 2267. Now, the Gorn should be well known to anyone who knows anything about Star Trek, as the Gorn is the lizard creature that Kirk has to fight on the planet, with the fabulous fight scene. The Enterprise played Fox and Hound along with its 4 sister ships in a wargame exercise on Stardate 4729.4. They were equipped with new M5 Multitronic unit computers, and stripped of most of its crew, the Enterprise became a killing machine, crippling the USS Excalibur and killing its entire crew before Kirk could reassert control. In 2267, birds of prey of the Imperial Klingon fleet, which were fitted also with cloaking devices like the Romulans, as well as heavy weapons, were frequent opponents of the Enterprise. A Klingon commander known as Kor held the Enterprise and Kirk in high professional regard, and relished the prospect of battle. Lower ranks chose to mock the starship. On one occasion, Korax compared the vessel to a garbage scow, before he corrected himself, adding, it should be hauled away as garbage. But with all this talk of Klingons, who were these attackers? Well, the Klingons were a warrior race from the planet Kronos, as I said earlier, and they have been at odds with the humans for decades, ever since the whole Tribble debacle. Again, that's another story. But it was actually a much deeper, and it would need an entire episode to discuss the Klingons themselves and why they did not like the humans or the Federation. Now, while Starfleet rallied its forces at an outbreak of the Federation Klingon War in 2267, as the initial war between the Federation and Klingon Empire broke out, Kirk and Spock met with the Organian Council of Elders and attempted to convince the Organians, who were apparently primitive, to accept Federation protection. Shortly after the planet Organia was subsequently occupied by Klingons, Kirk and Spock began conducting a guerrilla war against the Klingon occupation. But the Organians then abandoned their false humanoid forms and intervened, forcing an end to the interstellar war and imposing the Treaty of Organia. The Organians predicted that, in time, the antagonistic powers would eventually become friends, but for now, they stopped an all-out war between these two peoples. Now, the Enterprise did sporadically engage with Klingons throughout its voyage, even though the Enterprise wasn't really a true warship. A bird of prey failed in an attempt to blockade the Enterprise from Capula 4 in 2267, sabotaged during a diplomatic mission of the Talon system in 2268. The ship successfully fought off the assault of a harassing Romulan D7 warship. The same year, the Enterprise was forced to destroy a battlecruiser that Kang had commanded but had recently abandoned, and the rescued Klingons subsequently made an unsuccessful attempt to gain control of the Enterprise from Kirk. Now, the Romulan Star Empire at this point had re-emerged from centuries of isolation, and they wanted to battle with the Federation through neutral zone incursions during 2266. The Enterprise would respond in kind and was victorious against a new Romulan bird of prey equipped with cloaking device and plasma torpedoes. In later encounters, the Romulan fleet used strength of number in their efforts to overwhelm the Enterprise. But when Commander Stalker took temporary command and violated the neutral zone in 2267, up to 10 birds of prey swarmed and pummeled the starship until Kirk's use of a bluff to inspire a withdrawal. In 2268, the Enterprise again violated the neutral zone for purpose of espionage and was quickly surrounded by 3 Romulan D7 class battlecruisers. She escaped by becoming the first Federation vessel to install and successfully utilize a Romulan cloaking device, be it a stolen one. Near Tau Ceti in the following year, Kirk employed the Cochrane Deceleration maneuver, which involved a starship making a full stop and a quick 120-degree stress turn. The maneuver was used just as a faster enemy ship had made an attack run and was about to pass by. The maneuver allowed the starship to attack the aft section of the enemy ship when its forward was being protected by its forward shield, thus allowing the Enterprise to defeat the Romulan forces. In the final years of Kirk's original mission, the ship was ambushed by a trio of Romulan battlecruisers while on a routine survey. The Enterprise managed to escape through the energy field that adversely affected the ship's main computer. The now malfunctioning systems were corrected by another pass through the field, this time with the Romulan ship in pursuit. The attackers then became the incapacitated ones, and the Enterprise was therefore able to escape. Now, you would think that over 5 years, many people have died, and this is true. Service aboard the Enterprise proved to be very hazardous. Between 2265 and 2269, individuals who were killed while assigned on the ship include at least 58 officers and crew. 13.5% of the standard complement of 430. 9 crew members were killed when the Enterprise encountered the galactic barrier in 2265, and 3 died on Delta Vega. 2 of the 7 crew members assigned to study Muraski 312 on the shuttlecraft Galileo died at the hands of a large creature on Taurus II. In 2267, Enterprise security officers Hendroff, Kaplan, Mallory, and Marple were killed on the planet Gamma Trianguli 6. I apologize if I pronounced that wrong. It's been a long time since I've seen Enterprise. An outbreak of Rigelian fever in 2269 killed 3 crew members and imperiled the rest until a source of Ritalin could be obtained, as well as 2 Enterprise security officers were beamed out into open space while the ship was under control of Gorgon. Lieutenant Calloway was vaporized by Captain Tracy on Omega 4, but later was somehow resurrected. Yeoman Thompson was reduced to a dry solid and was killed where the Kelvin Rowan crushed the object in his hand. Now all of this is about the NCC 1701 Enterprise, not the future B, C, D, or even E. But as new technology came, sometimes during repairs, a retrofit or refit was performed. The Enterprise's first documented refit occurred sometime between 2254 and 2265, and only minor changes were made to the ship's exterior, most notably the impulse engines, warp nacelles, running lights, and hull markings. More substantial changes were made to the interior. A second, more extensive refit occurred at some point after the craft's encounter with the galactic barrier in 2265. This refit involved replacing the bridge module, a newer, smaller deflector dish, and refinements to the warp nacelles. The ship's interior was also upgraded. A new bridge module included consoles with triangular and circular resin buttons as well as white color rocker flip switches. In the late 2260s, a new bridge module added a second turbolift, and the design moved forward a completely smooth circular configuration, both standard features and future starships. At the same point, the translucent overhead dome was obscured, not to return until the Galaxy-class bridge. At the end of the 5-year mission, the Enterprise returned to Earth in 2270. Following its success, the ship had become a recognized symbol of Starfleet and the Federation. Starfleet's array of unique assignment patches were abandoned for the universal adoption of the Enterprise Delta symbol, previously used on the assignment patch for the USS Kelvin. The stalwart vessel itself was by then 25 years old and returning from deployment that included an unprecedented number of warp speed records, hull-pounding battles, and frame-stressing maneuvers. System upgrades with new technology after long deployments were far from unusual in the ship's history. However, the Enterprise's overhaul of the early 2070s became a nearly keel-up redesign and reconstruction project. The very heart of the ship was replaced and radically different. A new vertical warp core assembly, linked to new, heavier warp engine nacelles, atop swept-back pylons, fully integrated with the impulse engines at this point. The new drive system allowed for an expanded cargo hull and a new, linked shuttle bay. Weapon systems upgraded also. It now included dual phaser banks and a power channeled directly from the warp engines. Also, double photon torpedoes and probe launchers were installed atop the secondary hull. Multiple egress points were now included, including a portside space dock hatch, dual ventral spacewalk bays, 4 dorsal service hatches, and a standardized docking ring port after the bridge on the primary hull. A new bridge module reflected the modern computer systems, as well as operating systems and ergonomics that ran throughout the ship. Following Kirk's promotion to Rear Admiral and posting to Chief Starfleet Operations, his successor, Captain Will Decker, whom Kirk himself picked to succeed him, oversaw the refit, assisted by Chief Engineer Commander Montgomery Scott. After 18 months in space dock for refit, the Enterprise was pressed into service weeks ahead of schedule in response to the V'ger crisis, once again under Kirk's command. Decker was temporarily demoted to commander and post as executive officer because of his familiarity with the new design. Incomplete systems had to be serviced during the vessel's shakedown cruise en route to V'ger, including the first test of the new warp engines. Shortly after launch, a matter-antimatter intermix malfunction ruptured the warp field and led to the Enterprise entering into an unstable wormhole. Commander Decker belayed an order from Admiral Kirk to destroy an asteroid in their path, which had been dragged into the ruptured warp field along with them. The refitted phasers now channeled power directly from the main engines, and at a point beyond the dilithium magnetomic initiator stage. This would have been very dangerous if they had used their phasers with the antimatter imbalance within the warp engines. This was a design change that Kirk had not been aware. Decker ordered the use of photon torpedoes instead as a backup, and they had designed to draw power from a separate system in case of major phaser loss. The timely arrival of Commander Spock brought correction to the intermix problem. Once the V'ger threat was averted, Captain Decker was listed as missing in action, and the Enterprise remained under Admiral Kirk's command for the interim period. At some point, Kirk passed command on to Captain Spock. The new design and components tested and were proven aboard the Enterprise's influence a generation of starship design, from the Miranda class to the Constellation class, as well as other retrofitted Constitution class. In 2285, the Enterprise was in a low-tempo training cycle, based in the Sol system, which is where Earth is based. Admiral Kirk boarded his old command to observe the cadet training crews. It is now that Khan Noonien Singh had escaped from his exile on Seti Alpha 5 and hijacked the USS Reliant, leading to its theft of the Genesis device from the Regula 1 space station. We should recall Khan from the alternate reality, but at this point, Khan had amassed an army of genetically modified humans and sought revenge on the people who would do him harm. So who or what was Khan? Well, he is the product of genetic modification carried out during the 20th century, and he was placed in suspended animation as he was a harm and a risk to the humans, only to be awakened to give the Federation new and better weapons and technology. The Enterprise was tasked to investigate, and Spock deferred his command to Admiral Kirk. Subsequent engagements with the Reliant left the ship badly damaged with cadet and crew deaths, including Captain Spock. Upon Enterprise returning to Earth, Starfleet Command and Chief Admiral Harry Morrow announced that the starship, at that point 40 years old, would be decommissioned. When Morrow denied Kirk's request permission to return to the Mutaras sector, Kirk conspired with the senior officers and stole the Enterprise from Earth's space dock in order to recover Spock's body from the Genesis planet. They wished to bring it and Spock's soul or essence that was now possessed by Leonard McCoy to Vulcan. As part of the plan, Kirk had Scott rig up an automation system to run the Enterprise so easily that a chimpanzee and 2 trainees could have handled the craft. At the Enterprise's destination, the ship was attacked by a Klingon bird of prey, operated by Klingon Commander Krug, an assault that left the Enterprise disabled. Scotty's automation system was not designed for combat and overloaded when the ship was attacked. After setting the auto-destruct sequence, Kirk and his crew abandoned the ship for the surface of the Genesis planet. Demolition charges were placed in the bridge and elsewhere throughout the ship's saucer section, exploded and killed the Klingon boarding party. The secondary hull, with what was left of the saucer, fell from orbit in a blazing streak across the planet's atmosphere, and thus the Enterprise NCC 1701 was no more. thanks for listening. I tried out something a little bit different this week. If you enjoyed it, leave me a review on iTunes. Don't forget to subscribe, tell a friend. If you want to request an episode like this one, you can find me on all the social media. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, and Facebook, and it is at All Geeks Aside. There will be links in the notes below. And also, if you would like to help me out, I have some merchandise on a TeePublic Store. There will be a link in the notes below. And also, if you would like to visit over on Patreon and see if you would like to give $1, that would be great. I got some big things coming up very quickly. It's going to be fun. Thanks for listening. See you next time.